Then Elijah was afraid. He got up and fled for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
That's a very poignant passage. I don't know about you, but as I hear about the despair that Elijah hit, I can think of times in my life where I have felt like going and sitting under a tree and saying, "I'm done. I'm done. I'm finished. I'm tired. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm hurt," whatever feeling. But, I get under that tree and I'm like ready to be finished. And I don't think I'm the only one. I know many of you have hit that point as well. And this passage to me is actually really a huge encouragement. A lot of us think that we get to that point only because we don't have any faith, or because we've done something wrong, or because God has deserted us or left us or isn't there. And the reality is this passage shows us that is patently untrue. Elijah, if you remember, if you were here when we did the story, if Elijah was a prophet to the northern kingdom. Remember, it divided into two, and there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, at this point, Ahab is the king. He was archaeologically a very successful king. He had a lot of power, but according to the Bible, he wasn't so good. He didn't really listen. He was bad, a bad king. And he had a non-Jewish wife. He had married a foreign woman, Jezebel, who worshiped Baal. And so their kingdom was worshiping both Baal and Yahweh, which didn't make Yahweh very happy. And Elijah was sent to say, guys, you need to clean it up. You need to get rid of Baal, and you need to worship Yahweh. And in this couple of chapters before ours today, it's a quick story if you want to go back and read, like chapter 19, 17, 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there. This is the story, remember, where he gets in a battle with 450 of Baal's priests, and it's who can call down fire from heaven and light the sacrifices, and they try and they can't, and then Elijah puts water on it and wets the wood and does everything, and then he's able to wipe it all out. He through the power of God, he calls on Yahweh, and Yahweh steps up. So it's a huge victory for Yahweh. It's a huge victory. It should have been a red letter, awesome, fantastic day for Elijah because he won. His side was the victor. But, and boy, those buts can get you, can't you? But it really ticked off the queen. It made her angry. And so Jezebel threatens Elijah, and he hears this word of this human woman queen threatening his life, and he gets afraid. He had just seen Yahweh bring down fire from heaven, and he is afraid of this queen. So he races out to the wilderness, and he sits down under a broom tree, and he says, I'm done. I'm done. My life is over as I know it. And we wonder, how could he get there? Now, part of it is I think that, when we do life, we do ministry, there are times that are really stressful, and we work extra hours, and we're pushed extra hard, and we're physically and emotionally tired. And I do believe that was the case for him. We see him sleeping and eating. The angel gives him food and lets him sleep. So he really builds his physical strength. And the food that the angel gives him enough sustenance, enough energy to be able to make the 40-day journey to Mount Horeb. Now, when you hear Mount Horeb, you may think about that's where a lot of the Exodus story happens, where God came in thunder and lightning and pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. And that's certainly what the people who would have heard this story from 1 Kings would have thought of. They would have been at Mount Horeb in their heads and thought, oh, what is God going to do for Elijah there? But I don't want you to get too far there. I want you to go back and think at the 40-day journey from where he was under the broom tree to where he meets God. And here we are at the beginning of Lent. We have roughly 40 days between now and Easter. A 40-day journey that we can take to where we can better hear God at the end of it. That we can better hear God at the end of it. So he gets there, right? He gets to the Mount Horeb, and he's waiting. He's like, is it going to be an earthquake, or is it going to be a fire? What is it going to be? And we see that the passage that God comes through, and it's not in the wind that is so powerful that it's breaking rocks and splitting mountains. God's not in that wind, and God is not in the earthquake, and God is not in the fire. But God is in the silence. God is in the silence. And that is so encouraging to me, because I know I go into life and I want to see God in the big things. I want it to be really obvious where God is all the time. And you think that God only has to be there for special occasions. But the joy of our God is that our God is there every day, in the big things and the small things. God never leaves us. And part of it is getting to a place like Elijah did in this cave, where he could see that God wasn't in the wind, and God wasn't in the earthquake, and God wasn't in the fire, but God was in the silence. And in our lives, I know it doesn't seem possible, but we have control over whether or not we experience silence to where we can hear God. So this week we think about listening spaces, and it's part of our journey, this 40-day journey to Easter, to figure out a space in our lives where we can intentionally listen to God. A space in our lives that we can intentionally listen to God. Now, many of you all know I have a little bit of ADD. I can't sit still for very long. It's hard for me to focus. I'm always thinking about what I need to do next. And that's all true. It's all true. But I needed to figure out a way where I could have silence and solitude. And I kind of hit this point when my kids were little, so that was even more difficult. But I found that if during nap time, sometimes if I was sewing, just that rhythmic sewing, I cross-stitched, I did smocking. I used to smock dresses, little christening gowns for people. When I did that kind of thing, it gave my mind space to hear from God. It gave me silence and solitude. I didn't have a podcast running. I didn't have a sermon going. I could just have stillness. I could have silence and solitude, and I could hear God speak. I could just spend that time with God. Walking. I would walk the dogs, hours of walking our guide dogs. And when I walked them, again, I didn't listen to music because I was working with the dog, but it gave me silence and solitude to be able to hear God and to learn to hear God in my daily life. Now, again, we can be in silence and solitude and not hear from God, but that's usually because we're not being intentional. We need to be intentional and to say, okay, God, what do you have to say? And then start looking around. Notice around you and see what God shows you as you walk through life. As you walk past a neighbor's house, maybe who's suffering cancer, and you can pray for them, or walking by a neighbor's house who it's a single mom, and you can think about a way that you can minister to her. As you walk, you may think about a family member that you could shoot a quick text to, or a friend that might need a pick-me-up. But part of it is finding that space in our lives, whatever that may be, that we have intentional time that we can spend with God. Now, we're going to talk about listening to scripture and listening to other voices, podcasts, that kind of thing later on in the sermon series. But today it's the space. It's creating that space. And it could be a room that you have in your house. It could be over coffee. It could be in your car. I think I've shared with you, John, for a lot of years, he would get in his car, he would drive to work, and he'd park in the parking garage, and he'd sit in his car and do his quiet time there because he knew he wouldn't be distracted by anybody. So what does that look like for you? Where can you find that listening space, that cave, like Elijah did, so that you can watch all the chaos around you without getting involved in it, right? Because he watched the chaos of the wind and the earthquake and the fire, but he wasn't a part of it. He could step back and he could watch it and know that God's not in it. He didn't get sucked into it. He didn't get pulled into it and have to deal with it, but he was able to step away in his cave and see it from a distance. And then at the end, the beautiful ending of it is he gets to the edge of the cave, and there's this vision of him wrapping his mantle over his face, and he gets to the edge of his cage, and God asks him what he's doing now. And to me, if you kept reading, you could, in the passage beyond what Keith Beverly did, if you kept reading in the passage, you would see that God had a job for Elijah to still do. He still needed to ordain a couple of kings, and he had to get a disciple in Elisha, and he had work still to do. But once he was physically and mentally encouraged by the angel, once he did this journey to where he could hear God in the silence, in the everyday things, God had a job for him. God had a task for him. And we do too. God has something for each of us to do. And right now, during this Lent, I want to encourage you to set time aside so that you can explore it, so that you can understand it, so that you can reflect on it. God, we thank you that you give us your words in so many different voices, so that however we hear, whatever language is best for us, we can hear it in that way. God, give us ears to hear your words in our lives. Amen.